What do you get when you mix cinematic storytelling, unique stealth gameplay, captivating characters, and an unforgettable score? One of the most iconic and important video games ever created.
I've been waiting for you, Solid Snake.
Conceived by the mastermind Hideo Kojima, who originally wanted to be a filmmaker, but fate has led him down a different path, creating this influential classic. Today, we'll dive into the game's humble beginnings, its journey to becoming the masterpiece we know it now, the lore, and the strive for realism with the use of Legos during development. This is the story behind Metal Gear Solid. In the early 1980s, the video game market saw a flood of similar 8-bit consoles.
The new 5200 Super System.
ColecoVision, the only system you'll ever need.
Intellivision turns your TV set into a family entertainment center.
Each with their own library of mediocre to downright awful games. The confusion and disappointment destroyed consumer confidence and eventually led to the video game market crash of 1983, where a $3.2 billion industry fell to just $100 million in the course of a year. Somewhat unaffected by this was the PC gaming market, with computer systems like the MSX flourishing in Japan. Seeing this opportunity, the Japanese entertainment company Konami set up a division with the sole purpose of creating games for the MSX computer system. In arrives Hideo Kojima applying for a game designer position at Konami, hoping to create immersive storytelling experiences through the emerging video game medium. As a child, Kojima was a natural storyteller, and his parents encouraged the gift. At around age 5, they started a family tradition of watching a film together each night. The selection would include westerns, European cinema, and horror. They did not limit the type of films Kojima was allowed to see, and had only one rule. He was not allowed to go to bed until the film was over. Kojima loved it. At age 10, Kojima's parents started to allow him to watch films by himself at the local cinema, under the condition that they would discuss the movie's themes and direction afterwards. This love of watching films was soon met with Kojima's own creative spark when a friend brought a Super 8 camera to school. They began filming movies together and charged classmates 50 yen to see them. Kojima even convinced his parents to fund a 3-day trip to film a movie on a nearby island. But the young, mischievous Kojima spent the first 2 days swimming and scrambled to film a zombie horror film on the last day. He never showed the film to his parents. It was in the midst of this time of his life, watching movies and starting out on the journey to create them, that Kojima's world fell apart with the death of his father. In his own words, "I was just 13 when he died. It was hard and lonely, but in a way, it strengthened my resolve to become a filmmaker." But the odds were stacked against the young Kojima's calling, as there were no film schools near where he lived. Beyond that, the budget for Japanese films at the time were very low, and he didn't think he'd be able to make the kind of films he was interested in. In college, Kojima discovered the Famicom and loved playing Super Mario Bros. And the Japanese murder mystery, the Portopia serial murder case. He saw great potential in the medium and wanted to make games for the Famicom to tell his stories in an interactive way. So at 23, Kojima decided to offset the societal norms of 1980s Japan and apply to become a game designer at Konami, hoping to make games for the Famicom. Konami hired Kojima, but assigned him to the PC division instead, to design games for the then popular MSX computer system. The first game he worked on was a little game called Penguin Adventure. While grateful for the opportunity, Kojima was disappointed with the job initially, as he had hoped to make games for the NES, and felt that the 16-color palette of the MSX was too restrictive. Despite the limitation, Kojima was able to significantly expand the gameplay, adding role-playing elements with multiple endings. Konami was impressed and asked Kojima to take over a struggling project that was meant to be a non-stop military combat game. However, the hardware limitations of the MSX could not support rendering numerous enemies at once, so Kojima got creative and altered the game to focus on stealth instead of fighting. Inspired by the film The Great Escape, he wanted to give players that same feeling of almost getting caught, and by doing so, he can make a single enemy appear more menacing than a swarm. Kojima pitched this new direction to Konami under the title Metal Gear Intruder. However, Konami rejected this idea. They were concerned that by having the player constantly avoid confrontation, it would make the hero seem cowardly and not appealing to Western audiences. Kojima took this feedback and tweaked the concept. Instead of having a game over screen appear when the player is caught, he incorporated an alert phase, giving players the opportunity to fight back or flee if they want it. This new alert phase is akin to that of Pac-Man's, changing up the pacing of the game and making the player invested in the game longer. Because of this, Konami agreed to greenlight Kojima's directorial debut of Metal Gear. As the player, you control a military operative codenamed Solid Snake, whose objective is to infiltrate the enemy's base Outer Heaven, assess the enemy's weapon Metal Gear, and neutralize the threat. It may seem primitive by today's standards, the game was quite original and featured many hallmarks of the series, such as the radio transceiver, various weapons to collect throughout the game, and even the cardboard box makes an appearance. There was also a moment of breaking the fourth wall when Big Boss instructed the player to turn off the game. Solid Snake in this game did not have much of a personality, and his appearance was based on Michael Biehn's character Kyle Reese in The Terminator. Metal Gear was released for the MSX in 1987, to critical acclaim for its unique and well-thought-out stealth gameplay. The positive reception of the game prompted Konami to port the game to the NES for the international market. They did this without Kojima's involvement. In fact, Kojima didn't even play the NES port until years later, when he found it in the bargain bin. The NES version was a major international success, selling 1 million units in the United States. The success of Metal Gear led to the creation of 2 separately produced sequels. The first one, Snake's Revenge, was commissioned by Konami and made specifically for the NES for the North American and European market. Again, Hideo Kojima was not involved with the project and only found out about it when he bumped into a co-worker on a train ride in Tokyo. The co-worker informed Kojima of his involvement with Snake's Revenge and encouraged Kojima to create his own sequel. This led to the creation of Metal Gear 2: Solid Snake, the second and canonical sequel to Metal Gear. Directed by Hideo Kojima and released for the MSX2 in Japan in July of 1990, Metal Gear 2: Solid Snake significantly evolved the stealth-based game system of its predecessor in almost every way, becoming the fundamental blueprint for the series moving forward. The player can now make use of the new radar system, which displays the location of the enemies in relation to the player, allowing the player to determine what's ahead. Enemies have an expanded field of vision and can also detect sounds that the player makes. Snake is given a variety of new maneuvers to help maintain undetected, such as crawling and hiding in tight spaces. The transceiver has also been greatly revamped, with conversations now being contextual rather than being simply area-oriented. Despite these advancements, the game's many contributions to the series went largely unnoticed due to its limited release. In the Japanese market, the game was well received by critics, praising its gameplay and well-written storyline. When the game finally received a US port some 15 years later, it was retroactively met with unanimous praise among reviewers and collectors alike, with some claiming that it's one of the best 8-bit games ever made. Following the release of Metal Gear 2, Kojima and his team took a break from the Metal Gear universe and spent the early 1990s on a point-and-click adventure game called Policenauts. During this project, Kojima refined his cinematic storytelling, as he had envisioned this game to be an interactive anime movie. He even developed a scripting engine so that he could control exactly when the animation and music played, instead of the programmers. Policenauts shared many cross-references with the Metal Gear series, including the character Meryl Silverberg, a bar called Solid Snake in the opening intro, and the Policenauts theme can be heard during the Konami logo screen in Metal Gear Solid. Policenauts was met with critical acclaim following its limited release in Japan, praised by critics for its high level of presentation, cinematic feel, and voice acting. While working on a port of the game for the CD-ROM-based 3DO console, Kojima started exploring what it would be like to create a Metal Gear game that combined cinematic storytelling with state-of-the-art 3D graphics. The 3DO ultimately did not live up to the expectations, but Kojima saw another console as having the capabilities to achieve his vision: the Sony PlayStation. And so begins the development of the next and most influential Metal Gear game. The development of the next Metal Gear began in mid-1995. Kojima wanted to call it Metal Gear Solid rather than Metal Gear 3, because he felt that the previous MSX games he worked on were not widely known due to their limited release in Japan. The word Solid is a reference to the protagonist Solid Snake, as well as the transition from 2D to 3D graphics. During this time, Konami was undergoing structural changes, and Kojima's development team, previously known as Osaka Development Division 5, was relocated to Tokyo and rebranded as Konami Computer Entertainment Japan, and effectively tripled in size to a team of about 30. Kojima and his team spent much of the first year exploring the capabilities of the PlayStation. Kojima wanted to take full advantage of the hardware, utilizing every bit of processing power and even every button on the controller. They initially experimented with making the game in the first-person perspective, aiming to maximize realism. But Kojima decided against it as he found it too difficult to control. The team opted to give the gameplay a 2D style by having it predominantly played from an overhead angle, with the option to switch to a first-person perspective on the fly. Kojima wanted the camera to feel dynamic, shifting perspectives to allow the player to peek around corners as Snake is pressed against the wall. To get the camera views just right, Kojima used Lego blocks and toy figurines to model out 3D areas. Using a small handheld camera, he's able to test and iterate to get the desired camera angles and movements. These would then be coded into the game to achieve that cinematic feel. During the early stages of development, Kojima and his team flew out to California and had the Huntington Beach SWAT team educate them with a demonstration of vehicles, weapons, and explosives. Weapons expert Moto Mori was also tapped as a technical advisor in the research, which included firing sessions at the Steam Bridge gun rentals. In Kojima's words, if the player isn't tricked into believing that the world is real, then there's no point in making the game. To fulfill this, adjustments were made to every detail, such as individually designed desks. While the developers were focused on camera movements and gameplay, artist Yoji Shinkawa was head down on character and mecha designs based on Kojima's concepts. Shinkawa's art has always had a distinct style that's synonymous with the Metal Gear series. In his words, although the game is a work of fiction, I feel responsible as an artist to convince the players that both the world and the characters within are very much real. Solid Snake's physique in this installment was based on Jean-Claude Van Damme, while his facial appearance was based on Christopher Walken. Using brush drawings and clay models created by Shinkawa, polygonal artists then turned Snake and other characters into 3D polygons. Snake's 3D model was comprised of nearly 700 polygons, significantly more than other character models at the time, such as Lara Croft from the PlayStation-era Tomb Raider games. With complex character models, rich environments, realistic weapon gameplay, and cinematic camera movements, it's easy to see how Metal Gear Solid was primed to succeed in the gaming space. All that's needed was music and sound design to accompany the gameplay. For that, Konami turned to their in-house musicians. Music played in-game has a synthetic feel with increased pace and introduction of strings during tense moments. Fans of action movies in the 90s will spot inspirations from scores such as The Rock, Speed, and Top Gun. The music is a tapestry of bright and steely synths, complemented by brooding chorus and electronic beats that almost serve as unexpected sound effects. The auditory backdrop added so much to help make this game so immersive, compelling, and unforgettable, even almost 25 years later. The development of Metal Gear Solid spanned a little over 3 years. It was released in September of 1998 in Japan and a month later in North America. The game received universal acclaim. IGN stated that it's closer to perfection than any other game in PlayStation's action genre, and called it beautiful, engrossing, and innovative in every conceivable category. PlayStation Official Magazine called it the best game ever made, unputdownable and unforgettable. Computer and Video Game Magazine compared it to playing a big-budget action blockbuster, only better. However, GameSpot was critical of how easy it is for players to avoid being seen, as well as the game's short length, calling it more of a work of art than an actual game. The public loved Metal Gear Solid, and thanks to clever marketing, some 12 million demos for the game were distributed prior to the release, which led to its commercial success. It became one of the most rented games in the United States and sold over 1 million copies in 1998 alone. In total, Metal Gear Solid sold 7 million copies, making it the number 10 selling PlayStation game of all time. Soon after Metal Gear Solid's release, Konami worked on an expanded version of the game for Japanese audiences called Metal Gear Solid Integral. This version includes an option to toggle between the original Japanese voice acting and the English dub, new gameplay modes and skins, a special codec frequency featuring commentary from the dev team, and a separate disc titled Metal Gear Solid VR Missions, expanding the previously included VR training to 300 playable stages, including a photo shoot mode with Mei Ling and Naomi. Integral was then ported to the Windows PC a year later that supported higher resolutions and keyboard control, but lacked PlayStation-specific features that fans have come to love, most noticeably Psycho Mantis' breaking of the fourth wall, where he reads from the PlayStation's memory card. There's no denying that Metal Gear Solid shared a mutually beneficial relationship with the PlayStation platform. The hardware capabilities enabled Kojima to achieve his vision, while the game significantly boosted console sales. And this partnership will continue with Kojima's vision for the series' future. What started as one man's creative solution to address hardware limitations has spawned one of the most influential and iconic video game series of all time, with the first Metal Gear Solid single-handedly responsible for popularizing the stealth action genre and showing the world what games are capable of.